Welcome everyone to our April program here, the Hidden Gems of the National Mall. Excited to have you join us today. Oh gosh, lots of people joining. Wonderful. Feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. We love to know who we're talking to, where you're from, if you're students, what grade you're in, and it's fun to see who we're reaching when we do these programs. So we're glad to have you with us. This is going to be some of the lesser known sites, maybe places you don't know about on the National Mall. So feel free to chime in with questions in the chat box if you have them. We'll get to them as soon as we can, or maybe near the end. If we don't get to them right away, don't panic. We'll keep an eye on that for you. I'm Ranger Jen, and I'm one of the education people here on the National Mall, and we are very fortunate to be able to host these programs with our partner, the Trust for the National Mall. So I will pass it over to Jeremy, who will then welcome you on behalf of the Trust, and my colleague Ranger Bethany will be with you here as well too.
Thank you, Ranger Jen, and thank you, everybody. My name is Jeremy Goldstein, and I work for the Trust for the National Mall. We're the lead partner of the National Park Service on the National Mall, and we work with the Park Service to make the National Mall the best experience possible for visitors and students across the country, just like you all. Thank you for signing in today to learn more about the hidden gems of the National Mall. And most people think of big monuments and memorials when they hear about the National Mall, and the National Park Service Rangers who run the mall every day, they're here to share some of the lesser known facts, sites, and artifacts about the nation's most visited park. So we're excited that you all joined us today, and we hope you'll visit the National Mall in Washington, D.C. in person one day. And with that said, I'll hand it over to our team of National Parks experts. I'll hand it to Ranger Bethany to start the program. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeremy. Go ahead and share my screen there. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us today to talk about, again, some of the hidden gems on the National Mall. Ranger Jen and I always like to start out our programs, and if you've been on any of these, you're probably very familiar with how we sort of begin our programs here. But we always like to point out when we talk about the word mall here on the National Mall, that typically doesn't mean shopping. But it actually more means kind of an open space where people can gather to do a variety of things, such as celebrate and commemorate important individuals and events, sometimes even play sports. So we see a lot of soccer and baseball and frisbee these days, especially as the weather's getting a little bit nicer. And if you take a look at the picture that you've got on the screen there, you'll see this just sort of this long, grassy, open space. And that traditionally is what we refer to as the mall. Now, over the years, as the city sort of develops itself and grows and expands, we see the National Mall expanding as well. And if you take a look at this picture, there's probably a bunch of memorials, a bunch of buildings that you may recognize. Of course, up here in front is probably the most recognizable one. That is our Lincoln Memorial. The big tall monument that we see sort of in the back here, that is our Washington Monument. Over here, kind of along the tidal basin, we see our Jefferson Memorial. But scattered throughout all of those areas are small little gems that people pass by every single day. Many of them not even knowing the history or understanding the importance of some of the structures that we've got hidden around the National Mall. And the first one we're going to introduce you to, and of course, I like trivia, so we're going to begin with a question. And the question is, what is the oldest building on the National Mall? Is it A, the Smithsonian Castle, which is part of all the Smithsonian museums today? Is it B, the Lockkeeper's house, or is it C, the Washington Monument? So if you want to go ahead and throw your answer in the chat box, Ranger Jen will monitor that for us. So A, B, or C?
We got a B, A or B, leaning towards B, C, A, B. We got a little bit of everything.
Got a little bit of everything. All right. So let's see what our answers ultimately going to be. So for those of you that chose B or were leaning towards B, you are 100% correct. The oldest building on the National Mall is in fact what's called the Lockkeeper's house. And if you take a look at that picture there, it doesn't really look maybe like it's all that old. That's because a few years ago, we were fortunate enough to have that renovated, to have that restored to how we think it may have looked originally. But if we kind of look at some of the dates here, the Smithsonian Castle was finished in 1855. Washington Monument, 1884, and the Lockkeeper's house was finished and opened in 1837. So then the question becomes, well, what is the Lockkeeper's house? Well, if we kind of transport ourselves back to the 1800s in Washington, D.C., Washington had two canals. The first was called the C&O Canal, or Chesapeake and Ohio, and it started up there around Georgetown, and was supposed to go all the way out west to the Ohio River. Never really got that far, kind of stopped in Cumberland, Maryland, but it was an important sort of highway system, a way to get supplies to and from the west. And then there was a second canal in Washington, D.C. This was called the Washington City Canal. And this canal system was supposed to make it easy to bring supplies into the heart of Washington, D.C., especially as it's being built. You could pull stuff right up to the front of a building and offload your boat, which made it real easier than trying to take it off from Georgetown, put it on a carriage, and then bring it to whatever building those supplies are supposed to go to. And so if we kind of look at how our canal system worked, it started on what was called Tiber Creek. And then we had canal boats that would make its way through the city, stopping at, again, certain marketplaces, certain buildings. When it got to a certain point, it could either continue down the Tiber out to the eastern branch called the Anacostia River, or it can continue down the James branch out back into the Potomac River, taking those supplies and resupplying wherever it needed. Now, eventually in the 1830s, the decision was made that they needed to connect these two canal systems. And so if you look up top here, you can see how this waterway becomes one waterway from Georgetown all the way down to the eastern branch. And because they're connecting them, they decided that right here, kind of where those two canals met, they needed to put in what was called a lock. Now today, just like when we think of mall and shopping, we often think of a lock as being one of these three things. But at the time, and when we talk about canals, a lock was a little bit different. A lock was basically a gate that you would open and close to allow the boat to pass through. Now, sometimes in certain canals, once the boat passed through this lock, it would stay there and they would have to sort of move the water up or down so that it was level with the water in the canal. We don't think that happened here at our lot. We simply think that was a gate that would be opened and closed to let boats through. And of course, if you have a lock that needed to be opened and closed, that meant you needed a lock keeper, somebody who could do that job. And because the canal was open 24 hours a day and boats were coming through at all hours of the night, the lock keeper needed to live close to the lock, and therefore they were given a lock keeper's house. Now, the lock keeper tended to have a large family because, again, this canal was open all night. And so different members of the family would take shifts, a couple hours here, a couple hours there. And so everybody was responsible for helping out and managing this canal. So if we kind of expand our picture just a little bit here, there are a few really interesting things that we see in our photograph, or in our painting, excuse me. The first is, here is our lockkeeper's house right here. And here we see our canal. And it looks like we've got a boat waiting to go through the lock. It looks like maybe somebody is making their way to go ahead and open that up for them. One of the things you'll notice is this, what's called a pier or a wharf. This went about 1,000 feet out into the river. And when you think about the height of the Washington Monument being about 555 feet, you could put about almost 2 monuments. You could lay them out on this wharf here. So it was a pretty big spot. And generally what happened is that larger ships that couldn't go up and down this canal would park here. Sometimes they would offload all of their supplies and they would put them on smaller boats that would then transport them through the heart of the city, again, stopping at different marketplaces, different buildings, even different homes to drop off all of these goods. The other thing you might notice, whoops, as it goes away for some reason. Other thing you might notice in this picture here is this unfinished Washington monument that we have kind of just across the street from the Lockkeeper's house. So it would have kind of been interesting for the Lockkeeper and their family to be able to watch the Washington monument being built at that time. Now, what were the jobs of the Lockkeeper and the family? Well, the first thing was to open and close the lock to allow the boats to pass through. The second thing was to keep records of all of the supplies that were coming into the city. And there were lots of stuff that were being brought into Washington, D.C., things like firewood, things like vegetables and fruits, quite often building materials such as stone and marble, and even wood. Materials that were being used to build things like the White House and the Capitol and the Washington Monument would make their way through the canals on these canal boats. And so they kept track of all of the stuff that was coming into the city. And then, of course, the other very important aspect of the toll keeper or their job was to collect what was called tolls. Does anybody know what a toll is? If you live out in the Washington, D.C. area, you're probably very familiar with tolls. We have them today on our roads. Does anybody know what a toll is?
You have any folks from New Jersey? I bet they know tolls pretty well too.
It's true as well.
Bet a lot of states know their tolls.
Yeah, so basically a toll is just an amount of money, a fee that you have to pay in order to use the canal. And the reason they collected this money is because it's expensive to maintain a canal system. And so the tolls, the fees they were collecting went back into the maintenance of the canal as well as the lock and to some degree the Lockkeeper's house. Now, the Lockkeeper himself didn't make all that much money. Kind of imagine this. And again, we're talking about the 1830s, but about $50 a year is what the Lockkeeper would be paid to manage the lock. But they got a house out of it, and behind the house, they were also given a garden. So, you know, it was probably a good deal for some people to want to be Lockkeepers at that time. Now, the lock was initially pretty successful, or the canal was. And if we look at this painting of Washington, D.C., this is kind of what city officials and builders and planners really envisioned for this city, what it should look like. And if you take a look at the picture in the front here, you can kind of see the U.S. Capitol building. Back here, you see what the Washington Monument was supposed to look like. It never really was built this way. You also see the Smithsonian Castle sort of sitting here on the National Mall, and you see this beautiful canal system that runs right past the Capitol building here. Unfortunately, that's not really how things turned out. The canal mostly looked like this for most of its existence. And if you take a look at it, you'll notice that it looks to be grass growing here on the side of the canal. And there's probably dirt or even algae growing on top of it. The problem with the canal system was the Potomac River in this area is slow moving. To some degree, it's pretty shallow. So at low tide, or when it didn't rain a lot, there were places along the canal that didn't have water. And so if you don't have water, certainly boats can't float through there. In other times when it was high tide or when it rained a lot, the canal would overflow. And when it overflowed and it came back in, it brought all kinds of debris with it, dirt, stones, and sometimes even large tree branches. All of this stuff would get trapped in the canal system and block boats from being able to pass through. To make it worse, during the Civil War, cows would often graze on the Washington Monument grounds. And sometimes they would get just a little too close to that canal system and fall in. And so they had to be scooped out as well. And so because of this, the canal system really wasn't being used all that much. And it turned into a sewer. This is where a lot of people threw the stuff that they didn't want. And so it looked bad. It was really smelly. A lot of times the canal was blamed for some of the diseases that would pop up in Washington, D.C., especially when there was some bad water that was making people sick. And so eventually the decision would have to be made, well, what do we do with this canal? If it's no longer being used to bring stuff into Washington, D.C., do we really need it anymore? And the decision ultimately was made in the 1870s that they didn't need this canal. And so they put a road on top of it. Today, that road is referred to as Constitution Avenue. Back then, they simply referred to it as B Street. But if you don't have a canal and you don't have a lock, you really don't need a lockkeeper. And the lockkeeper really doesn't need that lockkeeper house anymore. And what's really fun part of the story is the fact that even though the canal disappeared and the lockkeeper no longer worked there, the lockkeeper's house was kept. And you can kind of see in this photograph here, as they have paved over the canal, you see that the lockkeeper's house is sitting right here. But what do you notice about the house? What looks strange in this picture?
The house in the street.
Yeah, so if you look really closely here, you can actually see that the house is sort of sitting out in a little bit in the street. And this is kind of a better photograph of it. And eventually it got to the point where they wanted to widen that street. Here today, it's called 17th Street. Now, to widen the street, you have to do something with the lockkeeper's house because it's in the way. And over time, it had started falling apart. It didn't really look all of that great. For a while, some people lived in the house. And then for a while, it was tools were kept in there, but it just kept falling apart. But for whatever reason, instead of tearing the house down, the decision was actually made when they went to widen that road. Well, let's just move the house over. And that's ultimately what they did. And so the house, if you look here, originally sat right here. You can see just how much of it was there in the road. And eventually they moved it just a little bit farther over. And it sat there in that spot for a very long time. The Park Service, again, kept tools in it. I remember when I first started in this park, this is where we kept all of our bikes and our bike supplies. If we wanted to ride bikes around the park, this is where we would go get it. But we had to be very careful because, again, the roof wasn't so great and the house wasn't in the best shape. But eventually the decision was made, well, you know what, we need to restore this house. And fortunately, we were able to do that with help of some of our friends. Who are on the call with us today or on the Zoom with us today. But in order to open the house, we had to move it again because it was too close to the street. This time we know how they moved the house. We weren't really sure how they did it the first time, but this time they simply picked it up and put it kind of on this little kind of flatbed, if you will, and drove it to where it needed to be, which wasn't too far from where it actually stood. So if you look at this gray square that you see here, this is where the lockkeeper's house stood after it had moved for the first time. And then it was moved just slightly back, just off the road. So if you came out of the house, you weren't right by the streets. And today, if you want, you can actually go in and visit our lockkeeper's house. It's open a few days a week. But I think what's really, really fun about the house itself, if you take a look at this picture, one of the things that we often say about the lockkeeper's house, especially since it was built all the way back in the 1830s, is that it has witnessed a lot of history happening in Washington, D.C., a lot of growth and a lot of expansion here in the city. It saw the Washington Monument get finished in 1884. It saw this big reclamation project, which basically pushed the river back and made room for memorials and monuments like the Lincoln Memorial. And you can see some of that work being done here. And if you take a look at the lockkeeper's house over here, it doesn't really look all that great. But again, instead of tearing it down, they just kept trying to fix it and so that it would stay around for a while. And I went ahead and took this really quick video just to give you an idea of what the surrounding area looks like today. If you've never been to Washington, D.C., if you've never been over to the lockkeeper's house, kind of keep that picture we just saw in mind and compare it to what you're seeing right now. It looks a lot different. You can see there that widened 17th Street after our sign moves. You see the Washington Monument there in the background. if you're not getting dizzy. And you can see Constitution Avenue here. So this is where that canal used to be, down this street. And today, instead of canal boats, we have lots and lots of cars going up and down Constitution. What's really cool though is that Tiber Creek is still down there below the street. And so that water is still right underneath there, running through some of the tunnels that they have underneath the roadway. And so the Lockkeeper's house is definitely a hidden gem. It's definitely something that we encourage people to see if you've got some time in Washington, D.C., to go see one of the oldest structures that we have here on the National Mall and see how the city has kind of grown and expanded around it, which is interesting as well. Now, not too far from the Lockkeeper's house is another little hidden gem that we have on the National Mall. But we are going to go ahead and begin, with a question. And I'm going to turn this over to Ranger Jen.
Okay. Where do you find the memorial to the 56 signers of the Declaration of Independence? Did you even know we had a memorial to the 56 signers of the Declaration of Independence? Anybody ever been out there? Not too far from the Lockkeeper's house. If you had continued kind of down Constitution and off a little bit, these folks know their area here. Yeah, I see the majority of you seem to be going with Constitution Gardens, which gets a little confusing, right? If we're talking about the Declaration of Independence, why do we call this area Constitution Gardens? Well, if the theme of our hidden gems is kind of how things have changed over time, we're going to see that this area, today known as, yes, Constitution Gardens, has undergone some changes and may still yet undergo some changes. But thank you, Trust for the National Mall, for this lovely photo of Constitution Gardens and what it looks like on a pretty day, or maybe evening. It's this man-made pond that serves as kind of a natural area for you to be able to get away from the noise of the city and enjoy a little nature and get away from it. So if we were just going to the left, we would be on Constitution Avenue, that road that is where the canal was. So this is kind of the northern border of this area is Constitution Avenue. This, though, Constitution Gardens, became a thing around our bicentennial. If we think back to about the 1970s, that's when this area became this view that you see here today. Might surprise you what it used to look like. A little bit different. Yeah, that space, that beautiful pond and that beautiful natural area used to be home to government office buildings. Before we had a Pentagon, we had these office buildings right in the middle of the National Mall. And it just makes me laugh when you consider like the cars parking right here and all of these huge big buildings. And just, it's so very different from what we see today. So these buildings were World War I era. And at the time, it was President Franklin Roosevelt, who was the Assistant Secretary of the Navy. He was sort of responsible for being involved in this process of getting these buildings built. And he talked about how they deliberately wanted them to not be very attractive so that they wouldn't stay around for a long time. These were meant to be temporary buildings. They called them the tempos. And they even expanded right beyond just this area to the Washington Monument grounds and to the other side of the reflecting pool. This is one of my favorite images of our park because it just makes me laugh to think that if you were doing business on the Con Gardens side of the pool there and you needed to go talk to somebody in the other side, you could actually take that bridge across the reflecting pool. That just is kind of mind-boggling to think about bridges over our reflecting pool today. So yeah, this is not how we imagine our National Mall. This is not how we want to think about it with all these buildings here. And so little by little, once the Pentagon gets built, these temporary buildings are going to get taken down. Except for those last ones. The ones on the Constitution Garden side are still around in the 1970s. in the time of President Nixon. And he's going to say, it's really time we get rid of these buildings. So in the 70s, those buildings will finally come down about the time we're commemorating our bicentennial. And the thought is, let's do something nice with this area. Look how close it is to some of the office buildings on the other side of Constitution Avenue. Let's make it a place where people can get out of their offices. They can come walk around, they can have lunch outside, and they can enjoy this rather scenic space. So this area is created in the 1970s, and it's named Constitution Gardens. I honestly don't know if it was meant to honor Constitution or because Constitution Avenue is right there. But this is what we end up with, and it is pretty fun. You never know. I find a lot of natural things out there. I mean, we have different kinds of trees, we have different kinds of birds. You see ducks and geese, of course, out there. And boy, you won't hear this very often, but gearing up and doing things around the bicentennial, there was a lot of different fundraising and different projects. And one of them somehow led to some extra money. And there was some funds around to do something special in honor of the bicentennial, and in order to kind of honor those folks who had risked their lives by signing the Declaration of Independence. So if you look towards the center of that photo, you see this island, which is the memorial to the 56 signers. So as you walk around the pond here from where we're looking at it, there's a little wooden bridge that takes you out onto that island where you can celebrate the signers of the Declaration of Independence. So this is the bridge you're walking on out. You see the July 4th, 1776. And it takes you out to this island where you will find a stone for each of the 56 signers. I'm a little partial to John Adams, so he ended up being one of the ones we show here. It says their name, their signature as it appeared on the Declaration. It's got the job and where they're from. And, you know, figuring that the most famous of our signers for his big signature, I thought he should get in here as well. There's the fancy John Hancock. But it's, you know, not only honoring these gentlemen, because of course they were all gentlemen, this is a place to contemplate what they went through. I mean, yes, they certainly were not perfect and had flaws and did things we wouldn't approve of necessarily today, but they did risk their well-being by putting their names on this paper, on this Declaration of Independence. And as we gear up for the 250th anniversary of this Declaration of Independence, it'll be, you know, maybe a neat place to come and think about this story some more. Our friends at the Trust are thinking about ways to maybe improve this space. And so check back and see what's happening there. But we look to be able to really use this space and celebrate this story and think about the stories that maybe we don't always tell around this time period during our upcoming, you know, 250th. There's a cold day at Constitution Gardens, but nonetheless, a place that's really neat to get away from the busy city. There's the wooden bridge that you can take to get out there. I often will walk people through this part of the park, and I hear from many adults that they have not been out here before and didn't realize it was a place to go. Here's a group of local fourth graders who have come out and are playing Signers Island Bingo that we've got available for them to investigate some of the signers and try and get their bingo card filled. So yeah, this is one of my favorite places. You never know what kind of wildlife you'll see. And maybe one of the ironic parts, if you think about the biggest holiday on the National Mall, 4th of July, Independence Day, you would think this would be a great place for you to come out and celebrate 4th of July. And because of the firework zone, it's a spot you're not actually able to access on the 4th of July. But one year we had fireworks in a different location, and I stood out on that island and I watched them. So that was really special. But yeah, this is a really neat little gem out there that is at least one of my favorite spots to enjoy. And it's fun to think about how it's changed from those ugly buildings to, you know, this natural setting. I don't know what comes next. Ah,
All right. So
I've seen that one before.
yeah. So we're gonna move a little way away from Constitution Gardens, and we're gonna come to the Washington Monument grounds here. And the Washington Monument, of course, is one of the most recognizable structures in Washington. It's very easy to see from most locations. But there's another hidden stone that sits on the Washington Monument grounds that a lot of people walk by and maybe glance at, but most people have never seen, or most people don't know what it is. And we often refer to it as the Jefferson Pier marker. So the question then becomes, what was the Jefferson Pier marker supposed to mark? Was it supposed to have been the center of Washington, D.C., the original location of the Washington Monument, the U.S. prime meridian, or was it supposed to be all of those things? What do we think? A, B, C, or D?
Had a little variety on this one too. Had some A's, some D's.
Okay.
Flying by, yeah.
Yeah, so for those of you that answered D or even A, you are correct. It was all of these things. And the Jefferson Pier marker is in fact named after Thomas Jefferson. He's the one that kind of wanted to have some kind of marker there that would indicate these three things. And if we start with the center of, or actually if we start with the location of the Washington Monument, and we look at where this pier marker is on our old map before the city sort of expanded out west, what do you notice something that might be wrong with putting a Washington Monument here, even if it's something as small as a statue of Washington on his horse? What might be a problem with that location, do you think?
It could wash away, too
Yep.
close to the water.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really, really close to the banks of the Potomac River. And they found when they came out and tested the ground that the soil was really soft. And they were afraid that they put any sort of tall, heavy structure there, that it might sink into the ground, it might not be stable, it might crumble, it might fall over. And so the decision was ultimately made to move the Washington Monument just about, I want to say something like 370 feet to the east. But this was supposed to be where the Washington Monument was supposed to be located. But again, way too close to the water's edge. And if we take a look at this drawing that was made as the Washington Monument's being built, you can see, and it's a little grainy, it's a little hard to see, but if you look right here, there is that pier marker, and you can see it sits right on the bank of the river at the time. And so it was probably a good decision on their part to move this Washington Monument back towards the east a little bit to make sure that it was stable. And even today, it stands very tall and very, very strong. So the other thing that this marker was supposed to have been was the center of the city. And if we kind of look at its placement here, and we draw the line through the front and back door of the president or the White House, which is right up here, and we draw a line from the Capitol building going west, right through the center of the Capitol building, you'll notice that it does match perfectly up to the location of where this pier stone today now sits. And this morning I went out and took a few photographs just so that you could see that there's some line of sight where this line here from the pier stone literally goes right through the White House. Unfortunately, the hill blocks our view of the Capitol building, but the Capitol building would be right back here, and this goes right through the center. If we turn our attention to the south, you'll see that this line goes straight through Jefferson's Memorial. That's right back here. You can see it again just over the hill there. And if we turn our attention to the west, you can kind of see it kind of matches up a little bit with the Lincoln Memorial there that we've got back here towards the back. Now, again, remember, all of this wasn't originally part of the city. All of this was reclaimed land that was taken back from the rivers in the 1870s, 1880s, all the way up through the 1910s. So if we were looking in this direction when this pier marker was placed here, we would be looking at the Potomac River at this point. Now, if you kind of look at the inscription that we've got on the stone here, it does say that it was placed there on December 18th of 1804. Positioned by Jefferson, so he would be the one that would choose the location. The other thing that you might notice is that it says it was recovered and re-erected on December 2nd, 1889. That's because the pier stone for a time was lost. We think that maybe when the Corps of Engineers came in to finish the Washington Monument, that they didn't really know what this stone was. And we think that maybe they took it away and might have even used it for one of the roadways that they were building. But for whatever reason, it did disappear. The other thing that you might notice on the pier stone here is what looks to be a part of the inscription is sort of chiseled out. It looks like they tried to remove it. Now, we don't know who did that, and we don't even know when they did that. But we think that the rest of that inscription might have said, being the center point of the District of Columbia. And perhaps they removed it because, well, it's no longer the center of Washington, D.C. today, because the city has grown so much. So maybe they decided that at some point that part of the inscription just needed to be erased from the pier stone when it was put back in 1889. So here's kind of a fun little photograph of the Washington Monument when they came back and started to build really the sort of the second phase back in the 1870s. You can still see a little bit of the river sort of towards the back in the canal, since they haven't removed that as of yet. But you can kind of see, if you look on the monument grounds there, you can see maybe how that stone simply would have been taken out and used or repurposed for something else. But thankfully, it has been returned to what we believe to be its original location. And it's a really sort of fun little hidden gem that if you ever find yourself on the west side of the Washington Monument, definitely check it out. And definitely do those line of sights. You can see some great views from the location of that pier stone there as well. Okay, so we know that here in this park, you can move buildings. We also know that apparently you can move markers or stones, but the question becomes, do we ever move memorials? What do you think? Yes or no? Are we getting a lot of yeses or nos?
We are getting all kinds. Somebody said totally. Yeah, so yeah, nothing really necessarily needs to stay put. And we have one memorial. There's probably more if we thought about it, but at least one we know of that has been moved, and also pretty off the beaten path as far as it goes. If you were thinking about visiting the mall, this might not come to mind as something that we would even be responsible for taking care of. And it's not something that we often find ourselves visiting, but we do have a site called the Titanic Memorial. Did y'all know we had a Titanic Memorial at the National Mall? We were thinking about April being a lot of anniversaries happening of historic events in April, and the Titanic, the sinking of the Titanic. There you go. Leonardo DiCaprio reference right there. Yeah, we were talking about that a little bit earlier about whether or not one of my colleagues said that maybe there was a story floating about that the director of that movie came and saw this memorial, and that helped inspire that scene at the end of the boat. But who knows? Nothing's been proven on that. But yes, the Titanic Memorial. For those that aren't familiar with the story, I'm not going to get too into it. Kind of disappointed I don't have a picture of a graphic of a sinking Titanic after all the canal boats we got. But the Titanic was a very luxurious ship that was expected to be unsinkable. And on its first voyage from England across the Atlantic, it hit an iceberg, and it was April the 15th, I think, of 1912 that it sunk in very short time. It was like under 3 hours. So it went very quickly. And they did not plan for enough lifeboats for all the people that were on the ship. And they pretty much focused on getting women and children onto the lifeboats, which meant that the majority of the men were left to not survive. And so there's a group of women who are going to want to come together and create a memorial to honor the sacrifice of the men who were willing to, essentially die for the safety of the women and children getting onto the lifeboats. And so this group of women are going to come together and fundraise, get the money together. And he didn't want it to be one wealthy person. So you might hear this story related to the Washington Monument as well. Nobody could donate more than $1. And apparently the first person to donate that first $1 was the First Lady, Helen Taft, who may appear again on this in this program, because Helen Taft was all over doing things in Washington, D.C. during this time period. So this is pretty soon after the sinking of the Titanic in 1912. Of course, memorials don't get built overnight. And what we're looking at is the original location of the Titanic Memorial, which, if you're familiar with Washington, D.C., is about, as I understand it, where you would find the Kennedy Center today. So the Kennedy Center gets built in the 1960s, and they will have to kind of I hate to say it like this. They have to kind of pack this up and move it, put it in storage for a few years. And eventually, and we're actually pretty impressed that this happened, it is found in storage a few years later and will end up at a spot along the wharf today, down near, I think it's 4th and P, are they southwest, or the exact street. I don't know what I do with my cheat sheet, but yeah, the location of it. So yeah, it's sort of far off if you consider where it started, and far off from the National Mall. I mean, across the water is Haynes Point, which is, a popular part of the park that locals like to come and enjoy. And actually our offices and where we're sitting right now is out there on Haynes Point. So it's not too far from where we are, but kind of off the beaten path. If you're looking for, kind of a view of this memorial, you got to really want to go and find it. But it's a really interesting story of this group of women coming together, wanting to create this statue, hiring this lady, Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney, the one who will, who's going to design the sculpture. I just watched a little video about her. She comes from a wealthy family, daughter of Cornelius Vanderbilt. Yeah, and really invested a lot in art, and created a museum in New York City. And really, not a story, having worked here for a very long time, not a story that I was very familiar with. And it just goes to show that there are always things that you can learn about on the National Mall. There's always things that you think you know it, and then you really find out there's more to learn. And this is the Titanic Memorial in its new home as of 1968. So they move it in 66. They because they're getting ready to work on the Kennedy Center, and they pack it away for a while, and they bring it back out in a couple of years, and it's at 4th and P Southwest, near Fort McNair. So if you're familiar with that area, you can see Haynes Point a little bit in the background there. But yeah, it is almost a little like a religious figure, perhaps. And the idea being that it's honoring those men who, sacrificed for the safety of the others to get onto those lifeboats. And yeah, it's pretty, interesting story. This has captured a lot of Americans and folks around the world, their attention. And there's also connections to another memorial. Gosh, it's on Constitution Avenue. The Butt Millet thing, isn't that what it's called? The thing, because there were a couple of Taft's friends who were on the Titanic when it went down. And so yeah, here's the erected by the women of America. I mean, that's just a fantastic inscription to the brave men who perished in the wreck of the Titanic. They gave their lives that women and children might be saved. So yeah, next time you're wandering around and you think you've seen it all on the National Mall, come check out the Titanic Memorial down along the water, the Washington Channel. Yeah.
So I have to admit, Ranger Jen, I've neither seen the Titanic movie, nor have I seen the
I
Titanic
know.
Memorial. So I'm
I
definitely
know.
gonna have to take a second look at this area and check this one
Yes,
out.
I only saw it last year. I was down on the wharf. I was doing one of those boat rides on the channel. And that's the only reason that I actually saw this. So yeah, I mean, between the two of us, we've both been here nearly 25 years and still there's still things that we haven't all seen. And yeah, pretty fun.
All right, so we're going to move on for the Titanic Memorial. And so we've just seen how memorials and buildings and stones can actually be moved around in Washington, D.C. But I wonder if memorials and monuments can be moved from other countries here into Washington, D.C. So here's a quick question. So what is the oldest freestanding, man-made, outdoor stone structure on the National Mall? That's quite a mouthful there. Is it the Japanese stone lantern? Is it the Japanese pagoda, or is it the Washington Monument? So do we have a lantern A, pagoda B, or monument C? What do we think? Oldest freestanding, man-made, outdoor stone structure on the National Mall.
Okay, I got lantern, monument, lantern,
Yeah, so for those of you who chose lantern,
pagoda.
that is absolutely correct. So the stone lantern is the oldest freestanding man-made outdoor stone structure on the mall.
Can you say that one more time?
I know, say it faster. It was actually made in 1651. And for a long time, it was in what is today Tokyo, Japan. But as we kind of know, we were given a gift of cherry trees in 1912. And these trees were planted around the tidal basin. We just celebrated our Cherry Blossom Festival just a few weeks ago. Most of these trees bloom towards the end of March into early April, and it brings thousands and thousands of people out to see these beautiful trees each and every year. And quite often, many of our visitors often walk by these trees and not realize that sort of hidden among them are some pretty cool monuments, memorials, and stone structures. One of those being the Japanese stone lantern. Now, this is about an 8.5 foot tall lantern, weighs, I want to say, something like 4,000 pounds, and it's made entirely of stone, of granite. And it only gets lit once a year. So once a year, the Cherry Blossom Queen and our Cherry Blossom Princesses will come out towards the end of the Cherry Blossom Festival, and they will light the lantern. And it will only stay lit for just a very short time. We don't leave it overnight, but it's a symbolic gift of friendship between the two countries, just like the cherry trees are as well. And there's some interesting aspects to the stone lantern. If you sort of look at this top part here, this is often referred to as an umbrella, and the umbrella keeps the part that is lit on fire safe from the rain or any other type of bad weather that they may have. On one side, you've got the moon represented here. So you can see sort of the crescent moon being shown on the lantern. And on the other side, you have the sun. And then between the sun and the moon, the centerpiece really represents the earth. And so the lantern itself is a very important feature of the tidal basin. And again, it was given as a gift of friendship all the way back in 1954. It's also located very near where the first cherry trees were planted. So in March of 1912, the president, or the first lady, Helen Taft, who, as Ranger Jen said, sort of gets around Washington at this time, as well as representatives from Japan, will plant the very first Japanese flowering cherry trees in this location, not very far from the stone lantern. And eventually these trees will circle all the way around the tidal basin. So if you ever find yourself out there, definitely come and check out the lantern. Now, speaking of the pagoda, we also have a Japanese pagoda. This one is towards the end of the FDR Memorial, kind of between FDR and Jefferson. If you walk by the tidal basin, you'll see this gift, which was also given to the United States by Japan, by the mayor of Yokohama. The pagoda was a little bit of a puzzle when it arrived here in Washington, D.C., especially for park officials, because it arrived in 5 crates. and it didn't really have any instructions on how to put the pagoda together. And you can see there's all of these sort of granite plates that needed to be combined in order to make the pagoda, and to make sure that it was right. Other organizations such as the Library of Congress came out and helped us out, so that we would put the pagoda together correctly. So we often refer to it as it's like one of our most challenging puzzles that we had here on the National Mall. But kind of going from top to bottom of the pagoda, it represents or symbolizes different things, such as the sky, such as wind, water, as well as earth. So it's kind of a fun little, again, hidden gems scattered around the cherry blossoms. So next time you find yourself circling the tidal basin, make sure you keep an eye out for some of these little gems that we've got there between some of our bigger memorials. So that is the Japanese pagoda. Here you can see the dedication of that in 1954 between US representatives and representatives from Japan. And if you look behind them there, you can see the Jefferson Memorial sort of there in the backgrounds. And this plaque, which was removed at one point, apparently this happens a lot on the National Mall. Things get misplaced, things get moved around, some things get damaged, and it takes a while to put them back. But if you take a look at the plaque that is now back on the pagoda, it does say, "May this pagoda symbolize the spirit of friendship between the United States of America and Japan, manifested in the Treaty of Peace, Amity, and Commerce, signed at Yokohama on March 31st, 1854. So it's a really old, very cool structure that we have there along the tidal basin. And I think we have one more place to share with you if we've got a little bit of time left. If you happen to cross the street, kind of where the pagoda or where the stone lantern is located, you will come across this another hidden gem on the National Mall. And so, of course, we have to throw out a trivia question. So what is this structure?
So is it A, a band shell for concerts, B, a place to get married, C, a war memorial, or D, all of the above? We seem to be going overwhelmingly with the war memorial. A couple people want to get married. Lots of war memorials. Want to give us the answer? It is all of them. Yeah, so this is our DC War Memorial. And I see, as we thought, we were going to get close to the edge of time here. If anybody's got any questions, now would be a great time to throw it in the chat if you have any questions for us about any of these places. And I will tell you very quickly about this one. This is the DC War Memorial. So it was built to honor those from the District of Columbia who were involved and died in World War I. So this is a really unique thing because it's right out there on the National Mall. You're right across the street from the Martin Luther King Memorial. You're right there at the reflecting pool. And so this is a local memorial built on federal land, and it's honoring those from DC. And so before I forget the other couple things there, it was built, when it was built, the idea was that it could be a place to hold concerts. And on the very first day when it's dedicated, the Marine Corps band is there. And so they do actually show up as a place to be, to have concerts. And it is one of two places on the National Mall where you can sign up to get a permit and get married. I think I saw on the upcoming calendar, there's like 3 weddings in one day next week. It's really amazing. And I think you were with me. We walked by just last week and we had a school group. We were walking through the mall and we saw a wedding happening in the DC War Memorial. It's an interesting idea, place to do that. But so this memorial, we're talking about World War I, which was our involvement in the US was 1917 and 18. And so in honoring those that died from Washington, DC, you'll see along the base here, we've got the close-up of the 499 names of DC folk who were killed in World War I. And what makes this so amazing is if we consider 1931, when this memorial was built, 1931. So I told you Dr. King's memorial is across the street. At 1931, Dr. King was 2 years old. So think about the times that he was growing up in and what the conditions were like in the country. These 499 names are in alphabetical order. So it doesn't matter your rank, it doesn't matter your gender. Did we mentioned the fact that there are some women on the names here. There's Bertha, yeah. So we have women, and it didn't matter your gender, and most amazingly, I guess, to me, I think, is it didn't matter your race. So in the 1930s, Washington, D.C. was still a very segregated city, and the idea that that these names are put on this memorial, regardless of race, gender, rank, all of it, right here on the mall in this kind of hidden gem that we have along our reflecting pool and Independence Avenue. So this DC War Memorial is a pretty interesting spot because it's local, but yet on federal land. The president came out to dedicate it in 1931. It was, at that point, it would have been Herbert Hoover, and there he is. Didn't you just find audio? You were listening to Herbert Hoover give his speech here. So if anyone's fascinated and wants to learn more and hear Herbert Hoover give his speech, but the Marine Band, which was led for a very long time by a guy named John Philip Sousa, known for his marches, came out of retirement to be here at this event. So here's the dedication day, 1931. This was November 11th, so they called it Armistice Day for a while. It was the day that World War I ended. But we know it today as Veterans Day. So November 11th was the end of the fighting in World War I. And I think I forgot to mention, but 1931 was also when the Titanic Memorial was dedicated in May of 1931. So both Titanic and DC were dedicated in 1931. So hopefully this is a spot that you can come by and maybe someday get married at or whatever, and visit. Another one of our spots on the National Mall that people often ask us about looks kind of like a little Jefferson Memorial. It's got the dome. It's got the equipment to make it look like a concert shell, band shell. And yeah. How old is it? How old is this one? Would have been finished in 1931. Little math for you there. What do you think? We thought we might even have some more of these. We could almost do a part 2 if you think this was kind of interesting for y'all to hear about some of the lesser known sites and the unknown places out there. If you think that you'd like to see some more of these, maybe we can consider that for a next semester, perhaps. Excellent. Well, thank you all so much. Does anybody have any questions last minute? Okay, part 2. We have to do it. They want it. The crowd has spoken. Oh, suggestion of the horse stables. We'll be taking notes. Oh, Miss Simon's 4th graders are here. Thanks for coming. Thank you all so much. Thanks for the nice feedback. Glad you all enjoyed it. Part 2. Okay. Thank you all very much, and keep your eyes open for more of these programs. We'll finish up, I think, one more with this school year, and yeah, we look forward to seeing you in the future and hope to see you out here in the park. And thanks again to our friends at the Trust for the National Mall for organizing and coordinating for us. Thank you. Have a good rest of your day.